We're recording.
Great. All right. Here we go.
Ready.
Welcome to the Afterword.
Hello.
Welcome to the Afterword podcast from Union Church in Livingston County, Michigan. Each week we sit down to think out loud about how the gospel of Jesus Christ and the truths of his word connect to the questions, issues, and practices of everyday life. And today we're talking about Genesis 1 and a theology of work. Hey everybody, welcome to the Afterword podcast. My name is Kyle and I am here with Ethan Ezikian.
Hello, Kyle.
Musician and pastor extraordinaire.
Yeah, that's right. That means I'm the one who's supposed to do all this singing around the office.
Well, you get your fill.
None of this, joyful humming as you work.
Just trying to make this a worshipful place,
Speaking of things that we aren't good at in this life, I have a question for you, Kyle.
Oh boy.
In glory, when we're with the Lord in the new heavens and the new earth, our job right now will be kind of superfluous, don't you think? So what are you going to do?
That's a good question.
What's your new heavens and new earth career?
Will there be astronauts in the new heavens and the new earth? That's the question.
Yeah, maybe you won't even have to work.
Childhood me would be very excited to be an astronaut in
Really?
the new heavens and new earth.
I bet there will be professional football in the new heavens and the new earth too.
Not sure on that one.
Yeah. I've thought before. I bet we'll just keep exploring space, and it'll be like all the good parts of the space movies without the scary parts.
Yeah. Well, speaking of work, Ethan,
I'm not that you asked, but I'm going to be a farmer.
Okay. Just a regular farmer? Or do anything specific? Like beets?
Remember the field that Thanos goes to in the Avengers movie?
It's just like wheat.
Yeah, he just like sits and watches the wheat grow.
It's like the gladiator field that he walks through.
Yeah, that's going to be me. Like a good redeemed version of Thanos.
Today we are talking about work. Pastor Ethan, you preached on work on Sunday morning as we continued our journey through the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
And as we look at some of these foundational texts that set up humanity for their role here on the earth, we see the Lord give humanity the foundational call and command to work. Mm-hmm. And so you preached a really helpful sermon on why work is a good thing and what it's meant to look like for us as Christians and how the work of Jesus reshapes how we think about work. Really appreciate your work this Sunday. Do you mind, it's only a couple verses, so do you mind reading those 3 or 4 verses and then give us a little outline of where you went on Sunday morning?
Sure. Genesis 1:28-31 says, "And God blessed them and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.
So in the sermon on Sunday, I would say that most of the sermon flowed out of verse 28, although we dipped into chapter 2 and then even into chapter 3, as well as kind of referencing other parts of Scripture. The main idea was that God has given us human beings the gift of work for our good and for his glory. We looked at God as the ultimate worker who sets the standard for what good work is. From that, we pulled the reality that work is a good gift that's given to us before the fall. So paradise for human beings is not a life of leisure, but it's a life of good work, cultivating the flourishing of creation. And we talked about how that sometimes we have a sort of caste system that we set up in work, where we think about the spiritual vocations being more valuable or important in God's eyes or noteworthy in God's kingdom than what you might call the secular vocations, and how the call to fill the earth and subdue it from God is really a call that makes every human vocation, almost every human vocation, commissioned by God. And we say almost because there's the reality that sin is in the world and sin corrupts our work, so that our work is frustrated because of the curse of sin, but it also perverts our hearts, so that some of the things that we give our time and our strength and our ingenuity and intentionality to are actually things that promote wickedness and decreation rather than co-creation with God, which is what the creation mandate is calling us into. That God, who has formed and filled creation, is actually calling human beings to continue subduing, like God has been subduing the chaos and bringing order and filling that creation. So it's work that we get to do with God, and then ultimately in Christ, who's the fulfillment of everything that's foreshadowed in Genesis. We have a reorientation. He saves us from our sin, and through becoming his disciples, we bring our whole lives into alignment under his authority, which includes our work. And so my argument was that the Great Commission that Jesus gives his disciples in Matthew 28 to go and make disciples of all nations is actually a restatement of this first Great Commission that God gave human beings to fill the earth and subdue it. And it's just giving us the right order of operations under Christ's authority. Making disciples means making people who find life in his name, which is the first step to realigning our whole existence as humanity back under his authority instead of being set against God. So, I didn't have my sermon outline in front of me, so that wasn't quite as organized as my sermon was.
No, it was pretty good, though.
Yeah.
It was pretty close.
Well, thanks.
That was it was a full sermon in terms of the breadth of the topic that you're covering, and yet
I felt like I just left so much out of things, what could be talked about related to.
So what are some of those things?
Well, even in looking at the text and thinking about work in general, there are just ways that God's provision for humanity within our work are highlighted that I would have loved to dive more into. Like, for example, it's so interesting to me that God gives human beings this great commission to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it, which is we talked about in the sermon how that's a call towards cultivation. It's a parallel to God putting Adam in the garden to work it and keep it in chapter 2, verse 15. And then right after that, in verse 29 and 30, God says, "Behold, I've given you every plant," and it's every plant and fruit that has seeds. And so to me, it's not just God's provision for what human beings can eat. It's God's provision for the work he's called them into. Here's all the plants that I've given you, and they all have seeds, and you can plant those seeds. So that was one of the things that you actually pointed that out to me first before, as I was preparing last week, and just thought, wow, there's so many layers of how God is taking care of us. Like nothing that he has given us to do, he has supplied everything we need for everything he has given us to do. And that was just a really cool thing. And then there was a big part of the text that a part of this great cultural mandate that just totally didn't get talked about. And that's the reality that the first part of the mandate is that God tells human beings to be fruitful and to multiply. So
Now let's talk about that for a minute, because you said in the sermon, and you just repeated it again here, that the Great Commission is a sort of restatement and I don't know, clarification, or at least giving you a new kind of lens to read our mandate as human beings through. Someone could say, okay, well, the Great Commission is what we're really called to go and make disciples. The commandment to be fruitful and multiply, then, to bear children, let's say, is really that's just sort of optional. What that really means is just to go and to make disciples. Mm-hmm. Would you read it like that, or is there still any sort of not for every individual, but for humanity as a corporate entity to have children and to fill the earth as they multiply?
Yeah, I think I would try to set it up this way. In Genesis, as we talked about work on Sunday, we recognized, okay, God's given human beings a task. Part of that task has been a vocation, a calling. That calling has been corrupted by sin. And yet at the end of Genesis chapter 3, it's evident that calling is still there, though it is frustrated by the brokenness of the world that's been introduced by our sin. And so I would want to say the same thing about bearing children as well. I think it's really fascinating. So I'll get to answering your question, but let's just notice some things. So God does commission Adam and Eve into being fruitful and multiplying. I also think it's interesting that he has built them for it. Mm-hmm. So when God created Adam, and it says in chapter 2, like before Eve was created, he put Adam in the garden to work it and to keep it. And then when God talked to Adam after he had sinned, it's when he's speaking directly to Adam that he says the ground will be frustrated. Your work on the ground will be frustrated. Similarly, he made Eve, and she is uniquely designed to bear children. Mm-hmm. And when he speaks to Eve after her sin, it is her ability to bear children that is cursed by sin. Mm-hmm. And I think about okay, it's very obvious that women's bodies are created to bear children. It's also maybe less so, but kind of obvious that men's bodies are created for hard work. Mm-hmm. Normatively, generally, men have greater muscle density, larger in size, can bear more hard labor than women. And I'm frankly not prepared to draw big conclusions out of that, except to say look at God's design in all this. As much as work is a part of human beings' existence, childbearing is too. Yeah. And just like fathers are called to be nurturing and to help raise children, I think women are called into work. I think there's a Venn diagram there of overlap between those two callings. We need each other for that work. Mm-hmm. But I do think it underscores the inherent goodness of bearing children. So what I would say to somebody who wants to look at the Great Commission and say, well, bearing kids, having children is not what God's called Christians to do. We're supposed to just make disciples and have spiritual children. I would say Christians are called to proclaim the gospel so that there might be new birth in Christ among all the nations. But that doesn't negate the goodness in God's design for bearing children. Mm-hmm. And I think we too easily, because of the air we breathe as Western people, we just too easily separate ourselves from the natural inherent goodness of raising kids. We too easily associate having children with derailing the plan for our lives or making our life inconvenient or what have you. So there are so many people who struggle with hard things like infertility and or just maybe they've never been able to get married and so they can't have children or something like that. And there's grief there. And even into those situations, I would say that the presence of that grief is a a reminder that there is an inherent goodness that you're missing out on. And so I would say to somebody who can't have kids for whatever reason, like you're not in rebellion towards the Lord.
No.
And there's not something wrong with you. It's not a sin to not have children. We need to exercise wisdom as we bear children. All of those things are true. But if I ever encountered somebody who was just like, no, I don't want to have kids. They're just annoying. They like ruin the plan for my life. I'm going to think, at the very least, I'm going to think, you're a fool.
There's at least something wrong in the posture, right?
Yes.
You could kind of think about it through that lens of the Great Commission, right? As the Lord commissions his apostles and says, go and make disciples of every nation. Even as we think about individual Christians today, not everybody can be a missionary who goes to the nations to make disciples. And yet every Christian is called to participate in the work of worldwide discipleship by posturing themselves in such a way that supports and encourages and values and honors and even in small ways participates in the work of global discipleship. And so in a similar way, I think for Christians, you can take this inherent goodness of having kids and filling the earth, which, I mean, statistically, historically, the church has grown pretty significantly, has made disciples pretty significantly through bearing children and raising them in Christian homes, right? So Christians can say, we are about having and raising children to glorify the Lord and enjoy him forever, to be disciples of Christ, which means that in the history of the church, you do see a emphasis put on the well-being of families, whether it's within the context of Christian communities or even within their social posture, how they engage with the community around them. They say, hey, it's a good thing to support and encourage families and having children. It's a good thing to have tax credits for when you have children. You know, those kinds of things. We can support and encourage those things without saying, well, if you don't have kids, you're necessarily in sin. But I do think that you're right, that tends to be the at least the modern secular posture is that, well, yeah, if you want to have kids, sure, go and have kids. But if it's going to get in the way of your hopes and dreams, then it's not a big deal.
Yeah. And from our perspective, I don't think in a grand spiritual perspective, we need to think of ourselves being in some sort of arms race with other religions, like who's going to win out. But from a human perspective, like modern Western believers are going to be smothered out by non-Western, non-Christian families who are having gaggles of kids because we're having 2.5 or less, Yeah. And we should be aware of that. Like, lots of kids does make your life inconvenient, but I think probably inconvenient in all the right ways. I think you're right to say that, discipleship, that the kind of discipleship that Jesus calls us to in the Great Commission can happen within our families.
Yeah, certainly not the only discipleship he calls us to, but one of.
And I do think for those who don't have kids for reasons that cause them grief, it is important that you see the church as God's family and see the kids of the church as people who you are called to love and care for and disciple. I think that's part of the whole picture. Yeah.
And it's a good and beautiful way that we do this work of filling the earth with the image of God, and not just the image of God in terms of physical human beings, but those who are, like you said earlier, aligned with the vision for humanity to know God, be in relationship with him through the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's the vision for Christians having children, not just let's just make as many bodies as we can.
Yeah. You, maybe to just cap this off, you were showing me a little booklet that was written by Kevin DeYoung.
Oh, yeah.
That you have. I have not read it. I don't know if you have either. But if somebody wanted to kind of...
Yeah, I think it's a helpful place to start, at least. It's a little booklet by Kevin DeYoung. It was originally an article at First Things, so you could Google it and find it online. But it's just called The Case for Kids, and it's by Kevin DeYoung. And I think if you just Google that, you will find the original article. It's robust, but it's not it's not a full book length or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah. I'm looking at you holding it. It's like you could read this in a half hour.
Yeah. And I think it's a good place to start, just in terms of, okay, well, what is the Christian practical, theological case for having and valuing children in our society? Yeah. All right, Ethan, we've talked about the cultural mandate, and here we've talked about having children in particular, but most of the sermon was centered around the concept of work in particular, the goodness of it, of our vocations, of our careers. Is there, on the flip side, a danger in overvaluing work? You might put this in the category of workaholic kind of syndrome or something like that. Can we go too far in this sentiment that work is a good thing given to us by God?
Yeah. I think in the sermon I said something like, you will either be idle in your work or you will make an idol out of your work.
Yes.
Which was something that I stole from a quote that I saw from Greg Gilbert and another guy who wrote a book called The Gospel, and something like The Gospel in the Workplace or something like that. So that was not original to me, but I think it's true that we can either undervalue our work and be lazy, frankly, or we can overvalue it and treat it as an idol. And I think it's true that work we can give so much of our time and effort to work that we build, because we build our value off of it. It can be a source of our self-justification. It can be a source of our self-validation, like why we exist in the world. But I guess when people want,
can I say something about that for a second?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Just to clarify, I think sometimes we hear things like that, and we hear, okay, well, I don't justify myself by my work. I would never say that my work is the reason that I live, or the reason my entire purpose for being here. But you can see that kind of attitude happening in the ways that we feel about ourselves. I think that's one of the right. Like if you generally are in a pit of anxiety because you've got work hanging over you, and you're only going to feel good about yourself if you feel like the work is done and it's done up to your standard, then it's those kinds of things that are kind of those symptoms of that. That putting work as your sense of self-justification or self worth. Yeah,
or if it occupies your attention in a way that's like arresting, that you can't avoid. If you can't enjoy the good gifts that God gives, like family or holidays or things like that, because work is hanging over your head, like that's something to pay attention to. But I often think with so many behaviors that show up on the surface, they're like flags that point us to deeper issues.
Yeah.
So workaholism, to me, can be a sin issue, but it's showing me a deeper idol issue. It's showing me, okay, like I don't find my identity in Christ, or I am trusting in my own strength more than I'm trusting in the Lord, or I am finding my value here instead of finding my value in what the Lord thinks of me, or I do value my work more than I value my other people, or something like that. Those are all things worth considering. I think when we talk about workaholism, though, here's my hot take. The impulse around like if you're scared of being a workaholic, or if you're scared of somebody in your life being a workaholic, I think you have an impulse to like begin to measure the amount of time that a person gives to their job and how it balances with how much time they spend with their family, or other things that might be important in life. And I don't think that you can necessarily make a one-to-one correlation between the amount of time given to your job and the diagnosis of workaholism. And here's my argument for why. First of all, I think we have embraced this myth of balance in life that really shouldn't be emphasized to the degree that it is in our culture. we talk about work-life balance, and I think the Bible gives us a picture for work and rest that is fundamentally imbalanced. Like work for 6 days and rest for one. I also think that the culture into which Genesis 1 and 2 was spoken was like a agrarian culture, and families worked all day long on taking care of the sheep and raising the camels and cultivating the crops from dawn until dusk. People be working. I don't think that there was a work-life balance going on. And I think the fundamental difference is we live post-industrial revolution, where all of a sudden this historically new thing happens in this grand scope of history. And that is that like men leave the home and go to work at a factory or at an office job or something like that for typically like when the Industrial Revolution happened. Now it's men and women leave the home to go to work. But families no longer are integrated as they work. And that presents a complication. But I think that since we have been created to work, the challenge is not balancing work and rest. It's balancing integration. So, for example, if I have to work on a Saturday, can I bring my kids to the office with me or something like that? Like, here's my point. I'm not trying to prescribe a different program for work. I'm trying to caution people from playing fast and loose with the diagnosis of workaholism.
Yeah. I think there's probably different kinds of people in mind when people think about workaholism. I think for some people you might have I think a pseudo millennial or Gen Z sort of vision in mind of like the individual who feels burnt out and it just berates themselves. I'm just a workaholic. I can't ever get enough rest. Yeah. And I think that kind of fits into what you're talking about.
Interesting that the people who always make those sorts of statements are the people with the least amount on their plates. That's me. That's Ethan, the unsanctified cynic talking, maybe.
Here's your hot takes are coming out. But I do think that somebody else might have in mind that that father or mother who uses work to escape family. And they might think of the concept of work-life balance less as work and life and more as work and family. And I think the integration concept that you're talking about is helpful because you're right. When God calls us to work, he's not just talking about our paid vocation. He's not just talking about the 9-to-5 job we might have. Especially, I mean, we're both parents of young kids. We don't stop working when we get home, but our role shifts.
Yes.
Right. And so
some people call it they call it second shift.
Yeah, exactly. So for us, what might be a symptom of workaholism, I don't know, whatever you call it, might not be, we're just working so hard that we can never rest, although that could be true. But it could be something like, well, we come home and we probably should spend time with the kids, but we use the impending deadline of a sermon being due on Sunday to say, well, I'm going to go hole up in the office for the next 3 hours. And I'm actually never really present with my family. I'm not doing that job that the Lord has given me. Right. Yeah. So I think that you're right, that the integration of work into all of life in some aspect and how the different spheres of our life work together to integrate is an important concept for us to consider. And it should give us some pushback if we fall into the world's idea of work-life balance. That's just you work for a third of the time, you rest for a third of the time, and you sleep a third of the time. And that's not really the way that the Lord has designed it to be.
Mm-hmm. So I listened to an interview that I'll just recommend because it was interesting to me. It was on the podcast called Gospel Bound, which is hosted by Colin Hansen. and he interviewed a guy named David Bahnsen about a book he wrote that just came out called Full Time. And it resonated with me because he was, you know how you listen to things and you're like, somebody else thinks the way I already do. so maybe it just like confirmed my own biases.
Love confirmation bias. Yeah, that's great.
But I found it to be an interesting take, maybe an interesting corrective to that whole like balance idea that I was talking about, and maybe more toward the idea of integration. I just think, I think you have provided some clarity to some maybe me just throwing out some thoughts out there, and I would probably just say like take that away from me from this interview instead of what I've said. But I do think like there are some of us who like it would be good. It would be according to our design to just really give ourselves to important things, and we might actually be unfaithful to our calling if we're not showing up early and staying late to do excellent work. I don't want to use work as an excuse to avoid other responsibilities that God has given me, like you've said. But I also don't want to use work as like a way to be lazy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think that's where the concept of different spheres of responsibility is helpful. God hasn't just called you to your job. He's also called you potentially to be a husband or a father or a wife or a mother or to be a discipler of others in your church. So you've got these different spheres, right? You might have your work, you've got your family, you've got your church, you've got your community, you've got these different spheres, and exactly how those are weighted is going to be different for each of us. Yeah. But we are called to hard work in each of those spheres. And so how they balance is going to be a question of wisdom, but the posture of being eager to work and for that ratio, as you mentioned, to be a lot closer to the 6-to-1 that it seems like God has designed for us than maybe the 50-50 or something else that the world may deem as the ideal. We are going to have a chance to talk about rest and how rest fits into this next week as we talk about the Lord resting on the seventh day. But that's helpful, Ethan. Is there, speaking of kind of I want to think of some other ways we might nuance how we talk about work. Somebody else wrote in and asked, okay, well, when our work does either feel like drudgery, which is one of the words you used on Sunday morning, that's often the way work feels to us. It just feels pointless. Or if our work even feels to be contrary to God's designs and maybe perpetuating evil and sin in some ways. How do we kind of posture ourselves or reposture ourselves when we realize that work has become at least some sort of looming negative in our concept of reality?
Yeah. A friend of mine worked for, he was in like the software field. And his company itself did not do immoral things. I believe they like basically built websites, but on a grand scale. It was a big company, and he made a lot of money. And if I'm remembering the story correctly, he eventually found out that one of their clients was a pornography website. And he went to his boss and said, like, I can't in good conscience be supporting this company in any way, and I can't be a part of a company that supports this company in any way. And there was a big long fight, and eventually he resigned because his conscience rightly wouldn't allow him to promote such wickedness. And so I think first thing that for me, that is the model for if you are in an industry or a job that you feel promotes wickedness and your conscience is pricked because the Holy Spirit in you is calling you to stop promoting evil. I think you need to, with integrity and patience and honesty, not necessarily with guns blazing, burning bridges on your way out, but you need to get out. So if the question is how do we reorient ourselves, when our jobs are promoting evil. Like, well, that's the reorientation, is get out of there, find something else to do.
I would say that can take some discernment for Christians, particularly when you think about the kind of degrees of separation, right? We can get in, I've seen Christians get into a place where all of a sudden they feel like they have to be the moral arbiters of everybody who benefits from their work. There is a difference between, let's put it this way, put it in a really concrete example. There's a difference between baking a cake that explicitly celebrates homosexual behavior and selling a cake to someone who you know is a sinner, right? So there is a difference between those two things. I can't remember the reference off the top of my head, but the Lord gives rain to the just and the unjust.
Yeah, I think
and
that's in
we
Matthew.
we are called to seek the flourishing of the people around us and of our communities, which means that sometimes there are going to be wicked people who benefit from our work. We don't have to be the arbiters to figure out if everybody who's benefiting from our work is righteous or unrighteous, but we can see some of those times when our work is explicitly and directly promoting or enabling evil in a way that, like you said, letting your conscience kind of guide you there, but that we know is that's just not something we can be a part of.
Yeah, like with my friend, he would have been giving his time and strength and ingenuity and intentionality to creating a marketable website for a company that promotes pornography. That's a direct line from his effort to sinful things. Now, if his company had created an app that streamlined productivity, and he found out that a pornography website was one of their subscribers, well, that becomes a little blurrier, right? That's kind of what you're talking about,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think probably most people we know are maybe not going to be dealing with this question directly. Like, considering, am I promoting sin in the work that I do? Probably more people are going to be finding themselves like just dissatisfied, directionless in the middle of drudgery with their work. How do they refocus, recalibrate, and there's several tacks you could take. There's an old movie, Chariots of Fire. You know this movie? It's about an Olympic runner who's a Christian, Eric Liddell. Eric Liddell. And in that movie, the famous line from that movie is, "When I run, I feel the Lord's pleasure." That's what he says. And he's actually like, part of the story of that movie is he's talking to a family member who's worried he's giving too much time to an effort towards this running thing when he was preparing to be a missionary and go overseas. And then there's another character in that movie who is like getting ready for the race, and he says basically, "This is how I justify my whole life." So obviously, we've already talked about not being the kind of person who uses your work to justify your whole life. I think one way to reorient yourself in the midst of the drudgery and directionless nature of your work can be to just try to put a finger on the ways that God has wired you and gifted you that activate your affections for the Lord and your joy in your existence as a human. And paying attention to those things and how they are woven into your job. And so that's one thing you can do. But I also recognize like some people are just doing jobs because they have to do jobs because they're providing and that's all they've got. And I think there, like you have to recognize the ways that God is providentially working through you to love the world. So a good friend of mine does a job that he absolutely hates, but it provides for his family.
Yeah.
And he is God's answer to give us this day our daily bread.
That's right.
For his family. Yeah.
But yeah, Martin Luther has a really famous quote on this that I'm not going to be able to quote verbatim, but it's one of the big pieces of the Protestant Reformation was breaking down some of the secular sacred divide among the
because the Catholic Church would have said the only thing you can do with your life that really matters is become a priest or a nun.
At least that's the only like sacred vocation, right?
Right.
That, not that you can't do anything else, but like there's a sort of caste system and hierarchy, and that was one of Luther's big points was, well, no, the Lord is working through the milkmaid and the farmer to provide for his people, and that is true. So I think the more you can connect your work to the work of God, the easier it is going to be for you to withstand those moments of drudgery. And there's kind of two directions you can connect. Like you just kind of hinted at. You can connect the work to providing for your family as your responsibility as a parent, as a spouse. You can also see it as a way that the Lord is providing for the world. So there's kind of bi-directional, and each of those ways is going to kind of differ depending on your context. So for some people, maybe you're doing a job doing advertising for a social media company, and you don't really believe in the social media company as like a real force for good in the world, but it's a job and it pays the bills and it provides for your family. The providing for your family piece is going to be the kind of weightiest part of connecting your work to the Lord.
Yeah.
The more you can connect your work also on the other side to the good for the world, the easier it is going to be to withstand. But sometimes it's that providing for the family that's got to carry kind of the weight of glory in your work. Mm-hmm. But I do think that it's worth asking the question. I mean, this was part of my becoming a pastor. Not that if you feel drudgery, you should become a pastor. Oh, yeah,
you got to talk about this. This is good. I'm glad you brought this up.
Well, I would probably think about it a little bit differently now than I did at the time. But at the time, a big part of my dissatisfaction, I was a sports writer. And
yeah, you were a big deal.
No, I was not a big deal at all. But
you were on your way to being a big deal.
No, but I part of my dissatisfaction was that it did feel like my work was not connected to what I knew what was most important in life, which is glorifying the Lord and making disciples. And it felt like, at least at the time, that my writing, what it was really doing, I wrote for doing some high school sports and some NFL stuff. And so it felt like I'm writing these high school sports pieces so that parents can feel good about their kids' names being in the paper. That's what it felt like, at least. That's not totally true. Or I was writing these NFL pieces so that guys had something to read while they were on the toilet at work and to figure out how they should think about their fantasy football teams, and so that disconnect between the end product of that work and what the Lord has made us for was part of the ways that the Lord pushed me into a new career. And I do think sometimes that can be true for people too. That doesn't mean that everybody who is struggling with apathy in their work just needs a career change. But as we do the work of trying to connect what we do to the flourishing of humanity, to the glory of God, to making more systems and communities flourish in a way that points to Him, as we do that work, we might come to some conclusions where it's like, actually, this company and this job doesn't really do that. And maybe if like you just said, if I connect the way God has wired me with my gifts, my talents, my passions to a different sort of career, there actually might be some relief in my purpose and sense of joy in my work then.
Yeah. And I that's such a great example of like how to think through the job that you're in now, but also if you're in a place where you're thinking about just what is going to be my job moving forward, how do I choose?
Yeah.
Like, the Lord has gave you, I love thinking about this. So you were working as a sports journalist and what really happened is the Lord transformed your affections.
Yeah.
And He took the gifts and talents that He had given you and He directed them toward vocational ministry. So it wasn't like you graduated from the lower calling to the higher calling. The Lord just guided your steps forward, and you prayerfully, with a lot of you had gifts and talents. You also had people speaking into your life.
Yeah, not an isolated decision.
Yeah. And then you had the opportunity to pursue that calling. So I think, like, when you're thinking about career choices, that's the trifecta right there. Like, what has God gifted you to do?
Yeah.
How are not only what you want, but other people, how are they speaking into that? And then do you have the opportunity to do that? So you had holy discontent. You had a lunch with a pastor and family members affirming you had this whole moment of like people calling you into ministry. And then there was an opportunity to do a pastoral residency right away. But if you had this holy discontent, but no outside affirmation and no opportunity, and you to this day were continuing as a sports writer, that's not sinful.
No.
It's totally within the scope of what God calls his disciples into, across the spectrum.
And I think that's where, you could have a whole broader conversation about calling. Even that word vocation, when we talk about work, is rooted in you can hear vocal in it, right? It's rooted in, well, what has God called each of us to? And the church historically, at least our stream of the church, has said every individual is called by God to some kind of work. It might not always feel that way. It might feel, mundane, but the Lord does equip us and call us both with that internal sense, the external calling and affirmation of other people, and the opportunity. I think those three categories are really helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, we need to think about this because we have such a highly developed sense of like special call. Like we feel like God should be giving every person a moment, a burning bush billboard moment. In the sky.
Yeah. Yep.
Go do this thing to change the world. And I just want to okay, maybe this is the day when we recommend short books by Kevin DeYoung. He has this other book that's just called Just Do Something. And I feel like that's the thesis sentence. Like, figure out what's right and good for Christians to do and just go do something. And that can be really important. And if you're somebody who's very discontent in let's think about parenting, for example. Some people might say like, I have these 3 to 10 kids or whatever, and I'm just like, I'm
somewhere in that range.
I just don't. I'm so discouraged, and I don't feel called to be a parent. Well, that's just not good language for you to use as a Christian, because guess what? If you are a parent, God has called you to be a parent. Like, find a different way to talk about your discontentment in your work, because guess what? God has called you into it. God has called you to be a church member. God has called you to do whatever He's given you to do to the glory of God. Like calling is a. I don't know. Now I'm getting into the weeds of.
We could talk a lot more. That might be a good focus of another podcast at some point, because I think there is a lot of misconceptions about that. But yeah, to sum all of that up, I think one of the most helpful things that came out of that was, how do you discern this? Well, those three categories are helpful. What is your internal discontent and desire and affection and skills that the Lord has equipped you with? How are people outside of yourself either affirming or shaping the sense where God might be calling you? And what are the opportunities that the Lord has put in front of you? Opportunities and responsibilities, like you said, with having kids there. I think those are really helpful. Okay, Ethan, we're getting long here, but there's one last thing that I want to ask before we leave. How do we connect the work that we're doing right now with what's to come eternally? Because I think it could be easy for someone to hear all of this and be like, yeah, okay, work is important in the here and now. Yes, I get that. But like, I'm saved. I can't wait to be done. Work is hard. The ground is hard. Work is hard. And I just can't wait to rest one day in eternity. And maybe our work then will be easier if the ground is no longer cursed. But it doesn't really feel like what I'm doing here matters for eternity unless I'm making disciples.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's significant. So we're going to get to the Revelation in this beginning and the end series. And one of the things we're going to see is that the Bible that begins in a garden is going to end in a city. And one of the things that I think you can pull from that reality is, and just to clarify what I mean is, starts in the Garden of Eden, but in Revelation 20 through 21, 22, it talks about we will live in a city with the Lord, and talks about the walls of the city, and it's a very different image. And I think that acknowledges the progression of culture, that by the time the Lord comes back, humanity will have executed the creation mandate. I also think that the way that you read, this phrase, like we talk about being in the new heavens and the new earth, we use words like restoration, renewal, making all things new. Is it a totally new thing where God just erased everything else, dissolved it all, and gives us something brand new? Or is it a totally redeemed thing? I tend to think that the Bible's pushing us towards the totally redeemed picture, which makes me think the parts of our culture that are good will endure. I think the new heavens and the new earth will be incredibly familiar and altogether new at the same time. There's this really great story, so I didn't lead with this. I wanted to lead with the Bible, but this story kind of just confirms and beautifies what I really think. It's by J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. While he was writing The Lord of the Rings, he had severe writer's block, and he was kind of despairing because it was he was in England, and it was during World War II. He wasn't sure if his work was going to be for nothing, because he wasn't sure if England was going to be invaded and his work would be cut off. He was kind of in despair and didn't know what to do next. So he set aside writing Lord of the Rings, and one day he woke up with a different story on his mind, and he wrote this instead, and it's called Leaf by Nigel. That's the name of the story. And in the story, Nigel is an artist, and he becomes captivated with this grand vision of a tree that he wants to paint, and he gets a huge canvas, and he's constantly working on this tree in utter detail and precision, and yet he's also constantly distracted by neighbors who need something from him or responsibilities that he has elsewhere. And so because he's so precise, and he's also constantly impeded, he only ever really paints one leaf on this huge canvas. And then one day he catches a cold and he dies. And there's only this one leaf that's finished. And that one leaf gets taken and put into a local museum, and that's all that's ever, it's in a dark corner of your museum. Nobody ever notices it. But then the story jumps to Leaf, who has passed away, and he's on this journey to heaven, and he's on I believe he's on a train, and the train is driving into heaven, and he looks out the window and he sees the tree that he has had in his mind's eye for his whole life and worked on so diligently. He had only realized in this earth one leaf of the tree, but in eternity he sees the tree that he had been working toward. And I think that is a metaphor for what the Bible's telling us, how our work matters. We will only ever taste the tiniest bit of what our good work fully realized would look like. But in the new heavens and the new earth, we will get to see the fruit of our labor in Christ in full. And I think that's the hope of Christianity. I think it means that our work today matters. To quote Gladiator, what we do in this life echoes in eternity. So,
well, that's a great place to end. There's so much to say about this. It's so pervasive work in all of our lives. It's there, and so it matters how we think about it. So I hope this has been helpful for you if you are listening. If you have any questions or comments or concerns about any of this that you wish to get fleshed out, we would love to hear from you. And you can send an email to connect@unionchurchmi.com and include the word podcast in your email subject line for us to consider. We thank you for listening in. Again, as always, the goal of this podcast is to equip the people of Union Church and beyond for discipleship and mission. If you are from that beyond context, we are grateful that you've joined us, and we're praying that wherever you are, we hope that this conversation will have helped you to follow Jesus and engage in his mission there. Thank you all for listening. Lord willing, we will see you again next week on another episode of the Afterword podcast. Oh, no, I never go to work. Oh, no, I never go to work.
You sing so much.